Good morning, everyone. My name is Herb Winhoven. I'm with Winhoven Group, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about System Center Service Manager work items and acronyms. So I want to start by talking a little bit about System Center Service Manager and what it is, and then we will talk a little bit about the various work items and acronyms, and then I'll jump into a demo. System Center Service Manager provides an integrated platform for automating and adapting your organization's IT management best practices, such as those found in Information Technology Infrastructure Library, otherwise known as ITIL. It provides a built-in process for incident and problem resolution, change control, service requests, release management, asset lifecycle management, knowledge management, IT self-service, and much, much more. It could be considered a ticketing application such as those found in other industries compared to BMC Remedy and ServiceNow. It's cost effective as part of the System Center application suite. So if you own SCSM or SCSM or any of the other System Center applications, you already own SCSM. It is integrated with Microsoft applications as well as other third-party technologies, so it does integrate with Active Directory, Orchestrator, and so on. It does provide IT automation and self-service for your end users. There is an HTML5 web portal which allows technical support analysts to respond and fulfill various requests from their email, from the console, or from the web portal. And of course, there is robust reporting via SSRS and SSAS cubes utilizing SCSM's CMDB. So here is a look at the typical inbox of one of our support analysts, and as you can see, we have quite a few requests assigned to this analyst. And one thing you'll notice is that in addition to the various request types, you can see that there are acronyms and ticket IDs associated with these requests, and that's what we want to focus on today. So let's start off by talking about the various request types. First, we'll look at incident requests, the most common request type in SCSM. An incident request is defined as an unplanned interruption. So, for example, something breaks. It's a break-fix situation, help, my mouse is broken, and so on. There are no approvals associated with this request type. It's simply, hey, I need help, and the support analyst will go out and supply that assistance. Next, we'll take a look at problem requests. Problem requests are similar to incident requests. There is often something going wrong in the environment, but when we think of problem requests, we consider two things. One, there are longer SLAs than incident requests. And this is because we're often looking at root cause. So, for example, if the Exchange server has been going down throughout the week, users may call in to create an incident request saying they can't access email, but then ultimately the Exchange team may create a problem request to look at the root cause, and this may take a month, several months, and so on. Next is service requests, or SRs. For service requests, often there are approvals associated with these requests because we're typically looking to gain additional access to something or get a new piece of hardware or a software upgrade. And in many cases, this will require manager's approval and so on. Again, longer SLAs because we have to wait for the thing to arrive or for somebody to grant access and so on. Next, let's take a look at change requests, or CRs. Change requests involve modifications to the environment, such as rebooting a server or applying software patches, upgrades, changes that may pose a risk to the environment. These often require approvals, so either through a change request advisory board or through management approval or other type of approval processes. Now we want to take a look at review activities, or RAs. Review activities are simply activities within the workflow of a change request or a service request, for example. The way that this might be used is, for example, if I have a service request where the user would like to order a new piece of hardware, I may need to submit or have a review activity as part of that workflow to notify the manager that a piece of hardware is being requested and allowing that approver to either approve or reject that request. We'll take a look at this in a minute through the demo to see how this works. Now we want to look at manual activities, or MAs. Manual activities are similar to review activities in that they are simply activities within the workflow of a service request or a change request. If the review activity is the approval piece of the workflow, the manual activity is where the work is being accomplished. So for example, if I order a new piece of hardware or I request a new piece of hardware, it may be reviewed and then approved through the review activity process, and then the manual activity would be assigning that action to go out and get the piece of hardware and deliver the piece of hardware. As part of the manual activity process, there are no approvals necessarily associated with the manual activity itself. However, they're often preceded by a review activity that either approves or denies the requester their request. Next, we want to look at release requests, or RRs. Release requests are simply an extension of the change management process. So for example, if we want to release a new piece of software into our environment, there may be several change requests associated with this request that affect things like the network team, the infrastructure team, the SQL team. If I've got a multi-tiered application, of course, many various teams and technologies may be involved. So there are several change requests that may have been submitted, and the release request is simply a way to tie all of these together. There are really no approvals directly associated with the release request, as these are managed through the change request process. And here we have our acronym cheat sheet. This is a summary of everything we just covered, and hopefully it'll be useful to you in the future. We will post this in our blog. Now let's jump into the demo. For those of you not familiar with SCSM, this is the Service Manager console, and here is the view where we can see the various work items that we had just discussed. So let's just jump right in. First, we'll start with the incident request. Again, the most common request type in the Service Manager environment. This is where we have a break fix issue, help my mouse is broken, and the analyst would simply fulfill this request by fixing the mouse. Next, we have a service request. Similarly to the incident request, it could be related to a broken mouse, in that help my mouse is broken, we would create an incident request. Here we would create a service request to order the user a new mouse, to acquire or procure that mouse and deliver it to the end user. Next, we'll look at a change request. A change request, as I mentioned earlier, is where we're making changes to the environment that may involve some level of risk. And as I mentioned, there are also activities that are often associated with this request type. So here at the top of the workflow, we can see that we have an RA, or a review activity, where we're simply asking a user or a group of users to approve or reject this request. And then next in the workflow, you can see that we also have a few MAs, or manual activities, that are actually taking action on this request. So we're going to look at change development, or testing the change, and then of course deploying the change. So this is an example of the different activity types. Next, we'll look at the release request. And again, this is where we can tie together a variety of change requests. So in this case, we're looking at implementing or upgrading our Exchange server environment. And of course, this may involve several teams, the SQL team, application team, and so on. So we would tie several change requests to this single release request. It's just a good, nice way of being able to manage this entire process and the variety of change requests associated with that change. And finally, we'll look at a problem request. As I mentioned earlier, a problem request is somewhat similar to an incident request in that something is often broken. There's an issue in the environment that needs to be fixed. However, the SLAs for a problem request are often much longer. So in our example earlier, we mentioned that email may be broken from time to time. Users call in, they create incident request, help, it's broken, and then maybe we reboot the server. it fixes the problem. However, if we're doing this on a regular basis, we may want to look into the root cause, find out why this keeps breaking. And that's where the problem request comes into play. We can create a problem request and dig into the root cause. And let's jump back over to our slides. Well, that concludes today's discussion around System Center Service Manager work items and acronyms. I hope this information was useful to you. Again, my name is Herb Winhoven with the Winhoven Group. Feel free to reach out anytime and have a great day.